Three questions up there. Do you systematically research unmet needs in the markets? And this is at the level of the product and the services that you have in order to competitively differentiate. Do you leverage the proximity to tailor products and services? And do you put the members' interests when you make these decisions, always ahead of the short-term objectives that are there? So on to the third topic. As we looked at the context and then the growth levers and examples of a number of cooperatives that are actually putting in place systems that will grow because they are meeting the context, we then turned to organizationally, what does this mean? So as you look at the cooperative and at your own cooperative from the inside, and you look at how you structure and how you behave and how you make decisions, what will need to change? Well, first of all, what are the strengths that you have and what should you capitalize on? But really, what are also the changes that you ought to make or you ought to begin to think of making as you think about positioning your organizations to face these trends and to take advantage of them moving forward? And we used, again, just to make the analysis concrete and to make it quantitative, we used this model, which is our way to measure organizational health. And essentially, there's 9 dimensions, but they can be grouped in 3 elements, which summarize how an organization behaves and how it creates healthy organization that is performing over time. The 3 are alignment, and this is what you see in purple. And alignment is basically the ability of the organization to define a strategy for itself and then to rally the entire organization behind the strategy. The boxes in blue are execution, and this is the ability of the organization to take these strategies and to convert them into real tactical execution steps, but also to put in place the systems, the processes, and what is required for these to be performed efficiently over time. And the third one is the one in, I think it's orange, renewal, which is this ability of the organization to actually keep its eye on the external world as well as its inside. This external orientation and the ability to innovate, and I talked a lot earlier about the ability to actually reinvent models and reinvent the products that you have to meet unmet needs. So as we did this, what we did was we surveyed a number, north of 700 cooperative employees. So the way we do this is we take surveys of employees of cooperatives and we compare it to the database, the comparable database we have of non-cooperative institutions. And then the red circle is the cooperative result and the blue one is the public company. And as you can see, cooperatives do exceptionally well comparatively, right? And not surprisingly, cooperatives, due to the democratic governance structure, the ability to align people, the ability to rally the institution, they tend to do very well on alignment. Not only that, but the employees in cooperatives are generally quite motivated. They identify themselves with the mission and the well-being of the organization, which then drives, obviously, their accountability. But when we began to look at what are some of the areas where you ought to begin to think about questioning and about asking what else could we do and how differently could we do? 4 areas emerged. The area of coordination of control, which is essentially the ability to manage very tight processes on time, efficiently. The ability to bring capabilities and increase capabilities of the organization to be world-class. The ability to be externally oriented, and the ability to innovate, so the renewal. And we emerged from this 3 imperatives, 3 agility imperatives. The first one is the imperative of decision-making. The second is the imperative of pursuing adjacencies. So decision-making, which is how agile can you be, how much more agile can you be when you take when you make your decisions and when you go to market with these decisions. The second is the pursuing the adjacencies. So how much effort are you putting in order to understand what are the other opportunities in the market and how do you take advantage of these opportunities? And the last one is the ability to be agile with talent. How will you drive very succinctly and very practically the talent that you have in the organizations? And there's a number of cooperatives that are doing this. There's a lot of good examples in the market for cooperatives that are putting in place very good practices. I will just briefly touch on 3 examples from non-financial cooperatives, just hopefully to infuse some external examples into the discussion. The first one is back to the cooperatives in the UK, and the example there is how did they use digital to engage their members to decide where they want to put 300 new stores. So they had this challenge of, I want to put 300 new stores in the market, and while they could have just gone and done some analysis in the back room, they actually went to the members and said, you are our members, you live in our markets, where do you want these? And based on that, they actually put the 300 stores. Again, technology enabling in very different ways of engaging the members. Second one is on pursuing adjacencies. Mondragon in Spain is, as you know, an industrial cooperative which has, for a number of years now, innovated products, innovated their ways of doing, and they're so far have been able to create a very virtuous cycle in their communities in order to drive growth. But what is really interesting about this example is, of course, the result that they've had, but what have they very deliberately done internally to put processes, to put systems, to put committees and governance model, to create links with research institutes and with universities, and to fund very specifically these innovations. And lastly, the talent. So, talent is scarce, but the real question is how will you be the top pick for top talent? How can you be more of a top pick for top talent? And the example there is farmers cooperatives out of Iowa. And the brief story is that they actually decided to move the headquarters from where it was next to the University of Iowa, create very tight links in order to increase their ability to source the best talent out of the university, and have been very successful at doing it. So the 2 basic learnings from this, from the research and from talking to a number of the executives are, 1, raise the awareness in the organization and decide which ones of these you want to go after. And 2, put in place structural but also cultural catalysts in order to drive these changes. So, on organization, really, how can your organization make democracy more of a driver of agile decision-making, not a bottleneck? How can you create an organization that craves new opportunity? And how can you be the top pick for top talent? Cooperatives are on the cusp of a new era. I chose this picture just inspired by the context where we are. The camel being one of the most adaptive animals, its relevance has continued through centuries, but its uses have been innovated over time as they engage with their users. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mansour. Thank you. Very, very precious information. I couldn't cut you. I couldn't do that, but very precious information. Thank you. Even though you took a few more minutes, but that's fine. I'd like to invite Mrs. Janido, Senior Director of Financial Institutions, Fitch Ratings. Alors, les agences de cotation, elles nous ont fait trembler. Elles ont fait trembler des pays, des États. Je vous en prie, chère madame, je vous demande de l'applaudir. Et donc, elle va nous apporter son éclairage.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. And particularly, thank you for giving Fitch the opportunity to be here and share something with you. I do have slides, but you're going to see that my slides are not very interesting, and they really don't add very much. So you can ignore the slides. I'll flick through them, but I would prefer if we try to listen, just listen to what I say, and maybe it will be much more direct that way. I'm Janine Dow. I'm based in Fitch in London, and I've been extremely lucky in my life because I've been able to work with Fitch for a very long time, and in particular doing a whole spectrum of financial institution analysis, from highly complex and trading banks in developed markets to emerging markets to very small banks. And for the past 11 years, I spent time in France, where I was doing analysis of the French banks. And as you know, the importance of the cooperative banks in France is very significant. So I had direct experience of the cooperative sector. And more recently, my job is to develop criteria for Fitch, so the methodologies which we use to apply to financial institutions in our rating process. And that's what I've been asked to talk to you about today, particularly how Fitch looks at analyzing cooperative banks, which we call banking groups, because obviously they include the savings banks as well. So what is the carve-out? What are the drivers when we look at your institutions? And I'd like you to note one thing. You're not going to come away today. This is not going to be a presentation about this is how you can get to be a AAA or this is how you will get to be a BB. Those sort of answers are in the context of our global financial institutions criteria, which apply to every sort of financial institution, including asset managers, investment banks, factoring companies, leasing companies. What we're looking at today is the carve-out specifically for cooperative banks. So if we start, our biggest challenge is that obviously your organizations are not legal structures. In its 3,000 or plus ratings that Fitch assigns to financial institutions, we're normally looking at legal companies. When we come to look at your groups, this is our number one problem, in that you are a collection of little banks, a collection of institutions, a collection of entities, legally autonomous entities, but something makes you different. And the first thing that we have to decide is, how different are you? And we've been hearing all morning about how cooperatives are different. How different are you? And what can we do to overcome those differences and insert you into our normal global financial institution analysis? What is meant by banking group? Obviously, as I say, you're not legal entities, and I particularly like Basel, the Basel Committee's definition of banking groups there. As you can see, an institutional network of cooperative and saving banks comprising legally autonomous banks joined together by a statutory framework of cooperation with common strategic focus and brand names. And the key points for Fitch there are statutory framework of cooperation and common strategic focus. Those are our starting points. When we decide whether we can apply our criteria to your sort of groups, we have to answer those fundamental questions first of all. This is just normally something that we present externally. You're obviously in those groups, so this means nothing. You're totally familiar with this. But when we present to people who are outside the cooperative movement, they find this very confusing. Obviously, there you have your members, you have your local banks, and sometimes in the groups, these can stretch to hundreds of local banks, which is enormous. You have your central body, which is for us the brain in many ways of the institution, centralizing risk management, looking after liquidity and solvency, employing senior management, and obviously issuing debt to the extent that your groups do issue public debt, and then your specialized subsidiaries. But for Fitch, the key is what goes on inside those dotted lines. Which of these entities fit into that spirit of cooperation, that framework of mutual support? And understanding that is our starting point for assigning ratings to your groups. This is a description of what I've just said. But the main rating driver, as you're going to hear over and over again, is that to what extent can we be satisfied that you can indeed be viewed as consolidated entities? And the only answer for us is the strength of the principles of cooperation and how far have those principles, how well have they worked in the past, and obviously, how well are they likely to work in the future? And when we assign our ratings, when we visit, we only assign ratings to some 20 cooperative groups around the world, but when we do, and in our management meetings, we will spend a lot of time analyzing the structure and the support of these mutual systems. We're not legal experts, but we obviously like to look from a legal framework, what sort of weight do they have, how do they work, how does the regulator look at them, and indeed, what sort of performance has been achieved in the past. Why are they there? Why are they there? Did the regulator impose these schemes? Are they the only way that a number of very small banks can actually be viable in any way? Does it reduce the costs through centralization? Does it help boost your franchise? What is the purpose of those schemes, and what is it that ensures the group operates as a cohesion unit? We'll look at case histories. In many of the groups, the spirit and the mechanisms of cooperation have been so good and so performing that, in fact, external creditors not only have never lost money, but also were completely unaware of any problems because the mechanism kicks in so well at the beginning internally. This is very important for us. We might think sometimes that we need external help, and in which case we will appoint external legal advisors to help us understand how the mechanisms work. But this is not the main driver. The main driver is what has gone on in the past, how well do we think it's going to work in the future, and why? How well is that support mechanism structured and annotated? Is there a proper system, properly documented in terms of how liquidity and solvency support would work in the event that one of your members was experiencing problems? When we are satisfied that the group indeed can be looked at as a consolidated entity, we have two choices. We either assign group ratings, which are ratings common to all the entities sharing in those internal support mechanisms which come into the little dotted lines, or we assign something which is slightly less, which is a floor. And here we say, we're not too sure about that spirit of cooperation. There's something there that doesn't quite meet our criteria, but we believe all the members within this group will not fall beneath a certain floor. So in order to assign a group rating, we need to have a little checklist over here. We like to see consolidated accounts. Obviously, Fitch works with consolidated accounts. That's our starting point. We really like to make sure that the strategy is cohesive and common and well integrated in all the members. Brand name and marketing. We note, for example, in some groups that there is a certain amount of flexibility, and some of the local banks might develop partnerships on consumer finance or insurance with different sort of partners. There might even be competing products within a cooperative group. We prefer to see a really clear level of cohesion and strategic commonality. A well-construed mutual support system. Obviously, that's key, and there we do the checklist. How does it work? What is the documentation? Is it recognized by the regulators? Has it been tested? Does the regulator view you as one group? We spend a lot of time discussing with regulators, and we want to find out how they look at your groups. Are they satisfied that you really can be looked at as one consolidated entity? And if we're not happy with those things, if something is missing there, we will kick in to our floor. In some cases, we've had issuers, we've had cooperative groups coming to us, and we've decided we cannot rate you according to our criteria. And in that case, we have the option to assign ratings to individual groups, individual banks operating within the group. Just as if you were standalone banks, but obviously looking a little bit to this sort of intangible support which exists. And that is also a possibility. Sometimes we might also have doubts about the actual application of, or the enforceability of the support mechanisms in certain jurisdictions. Sometimes the operating environment is such that we do not know whether those sort of support mechanisms will kick in properly. Just a number of very brief case studies here. I mean, this obviously, Crédit Agricole for us in many ways is the model of which ticks every sort of requirement that Fitch has for being analyzed as a group. So not only a very strong franchise, which we believe is enhanced by the common brand, the exact structure that we described in that little diagram, so clearly described support mechanism, a central body which is powerful in terms of centralizing risk management, very good centralization of IT systems. So for us, very, very easy to look at this group, go through our checklist, and assign the group ratings. Next, this is the Sparkassen group in Germany. Until recently, we assigned a floor only to this group, but that has been overcome, and now they do benefit from group ratings. But here we had some basic things missing. This group does not produce consolidated accounts. They do some sort of aggregate accounts. We felt that there was a bit of a limit in terms of the cohesion, but we managed to overcome that. But that was, in fact, one example of a floor rating assigned by Fitch. And then something like the Caja Rural group in Spain, which we felt, although we understand that there's a support mechanism which runs through that group, we felt it was not sufficiently strong to merit being rated according to our criteria. And for this Spanish group, we just assigned ratings to individual small banks within the group. I was asked to talk very briefly about strengths and weaknesses, and obviously we've been looking at what McKinsey has to say, but I think the strengths are going back to the core principles of what the cooperative banks used to do and indeed do very well. So as we look at the traditional sort of products and this traditional range of banking activities which cooperative banks produce, those are the sort of low-risk retail and commercial banking activities which are very much in favor at the moment. Retail housing loans, traditionally one of the products which have the lowest probability of default. The stability of the retail deposits, of course, essential, particularly now when we see so many financial institutions dependent on central bank support. Good local knowledge, obviously a strength. And adequate capital ratios. Of course, that's a bit of a link to the low risk weighting that you have on the asset side of the balance sheet, but good capital adequacy. And, of course, the support mechanisms. And if we look at the weaknesses, commensurate with lower risk, there should be lower profitability, so that's the flip side. But sometimes we can see that some of the cooperative banks have indeed taken on excessive risk, perhaps, branching into new areas, and the profitability as a whole has not matched up to that level of risk. Higher cost-to-income ratios, that's obvious, not only because